The dust on the horizon seemed to dance with the setting sun as Reese Adams squinted against the glare, spotting what looked like small shadows huddled by the side of the dusty trail. In the vast expanse of the Montana Territory, in 1878, unusual sights along lonely roads often meant trouble, and Reese had learned to approach with caution after 8 years of wandering these western wilds. Pulling back on the reins of his chestnut gelding, Thunder, Reese adjusted his worn Stetson and rode closer to investigate. What he found made his weathered heart clench inside his chest. 2 small children, a boy who couldn't be more than 5 and a girl, perhaps 7, sat trembling beside a woman collapsed in the dirt. Their faces were smudged with dust and tears, clothes ragged, and their eyes wide with a hunger that spoke of days without proper food. "Madam," Reese called softly, dismounting with careful movements so as not to frighten them further. The woman stirred weakly, her face pale beneath the grime. "You folks need help." The children cowered closer to their mother, who raised a shaking hand. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My children, they haven't eaten in 2 days." Reese knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. "I've got food and water," he said, reaching slowly for his saddlebag. He pulled out a canteen and some jerky, offering them first to the children. The little boy looked to his mother for permission before grabbing the food with desperate fingers. "I'm Reese Adams," he introduced himself as they drank and ate. "I've got a small place about 3 miles east of here." "Ruby," the woman responded weakly. "Ruby Turner." "These are my children, Emma and Samuel." She tried to sit up but faltered, collapsing back into the dirt. Reese assessed the situation quickly. Ruby was clearly ill, possibly with fever, and all 3 looked as though they'd been traveling on foot for some time. Their clothes, though dusty and worn, were of good quality, suggesting they hadn't always lived in such desperate circumstances. "Mrs. Turner, you and your children need proper care. I'd like to take you to my cabin, get you fed and rested." When she didn't immediately respond, concern etched deeper lines into Reese's face. He gently touched her forehead, finding it burning with fever. Looking at the frightened children, Reese made a decision. He lifted the small boy and girl, one in each strong arm, and said with determination in his voice, "They're mine now. I'll keep them safe until you're well again, madam." Ruby's eyes fluttered open briefly at his words. "Thank you," she whispered before slipping into unconsciousness. With practiced efficiency, Reese secured Ruby onto Thunder's back, then mounted behind her, holding her steady with one arm while keeping the reins in his free hand. The children walked alongside, little Emma holding onto his stirrup leather while Samuel clutched his sister's hand. "It's not far," Reese assured them. "You'll have food and a warm place to sleep soon." As they traveled, Reese learned that Ruby was a widow. Her husband had been killed in a mining accident near Virginia City. With nowhere to go and their savings depleted by medical bills, Ruby had decided to head to Helena, where she'd heard a distant cousin lived. Their wagon had broken down 2 days ago, and they'd been forced to continue on foot. By the time they reached Reese's modest homestead, a solid log cabin with a small barn and corral night had fallen. The children's eyes widened at the sight of the warm, golden light spilling from the windows. "Mrs. Hawkins," Reese called as they approached. The door swung open to reveal an older woman with silver-streaked hair pinned in a practical bun. "Merciful heavens," the woman exclaimed, rushing forward. "What have you found now, Reese Adams?" "Folks in need, Mrs. Hawkins. The lady's got fever and these little ones are half-starved." Mrs. Hawkins, the widow who kept house for Reese 3 days a week, immediately took charge. "Bring her inside. I'll heat water and prepare the spare room." Within the hour, Ruby had been placed in the cabin's small second bedroom, bathed and dressed in a clean nightgown Mrs. Hawkins had produced from her own belongings. The children, freshly scrubbed and dressed in shirts of Reese's that hung to their ankles, sat at his table devouring bowls of hearty stew. "Poor dears," Mrs. Hawkins murmured to Reese as they stood watching the children eat. "What will you do with them?" Reese rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Keep them safe until their mother recovers, then help them get wherever they are headed." The next morning, Mrs. Hawkins regretfully announced she needed to return to her own home, where her son and his family would be arriving for a visit. "I'll be back in 3 days," she promised. "Think you can manage until then?" Reese glanced at the children, who were sitting quietly on the cabin floor playing with wooden figures he'd carved years ago. "We'll manage just fine." After Mrs. Hawkins departed, Reese checked on Ruby. Her fever still raged, and she drifted in and out of consciousness. He bathed her forehead with cool water and managed to get her to swallow a few spoonfuls of broth before she fell back into restless sleep. Throughout that day, Reese found himself dividing his time between caring for Ruby, entertaining the children, and tending to his usual chores. Little Samuel followed him everywhere, watching with wide eyes as Reese fed the horses and repaired a broken fence post. Emma, more reserved, stayed mostly indoors, keeping a watchful eye on her mother. That evening, as Reese prepared a simple supper, Emma approached him cautiously. "Is Mama going to die?" she asked, her voice small but direct. Reese set down the knife he'd been using to cut potatoes and knelt to meet her eyes. "No, little one. Your Mama's strong and she's fighting hard. She just needs rest and care." "Papa died," Emma said matter-of-factly. "The doctor said he'd get better too." Reese's heart tightened in his chest. "I'm real sorry about your papa, but your Mama has something special to fight for you and your brother." He hesitated, then added, "And I promise I'll do everything I can to help her." Emma studied his face with an intensity that belied her young age. Finally, she nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. "You're a good man," she declared, repeating what was likely a phrase she'd heard adults use. "Mama says there aren't many good men left." That night, after the children were tucked into his bed, Reese having opted to sleep on a bedroll near the fireplace, he sat beside Ruby, spooning broth between her parched lips whenever she stirred enough to swallow. "My children," she murmured, her eyes fluttering open around midnight. "Where are my children?" "Safe and sleeping," Reese assured her. "You're at my cabin. You've got fever, but you're going to be fine." Ruby's gaze cleared slightly as she focused on his face. "You're the cowboy, the one who said they were his now." Reese felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I didn't mean any disrespect, madam. Just wanted the little ones to know they'd be taken care of." A ghost of a smile touched Ruby's lips. "Thank you," she whispered before drifting back to sleep. For 3 days, Reese cared for the small family. He taught Samuel how to gather eggs from the chicken coop without frightening the hens. He showed Emma how to knead dough for biscuits. And every spare moment, he sat with Ruby, whose fever finally broke on the afternoon of the 3rd day. When Mrs. Hawkins returned, she found Reese asleep in the chair beside Ruby's bed, his hand resting near hers on the coverlet. Ruby was awake, her color improved, watching Reese with an expression Mrs. Hawkins recognized all too well. "Well now," Mrs. Hawkins said softly from the doorway. "Looks like things are improving." Ruby turned, startled. "You must be Mrs. Hawkins. The children have told me about you. And they've talked my ear off about Mr. Adams here," Mrs. Hawkins replied with a knowing smile. "Says he lets them help with the horses and tells the finest stories about his days driving cattle." Ruby's gaze returned to Reese's sleeping form. "He saved our lives," she said simply. Over the next week, Ruby regained her strength. Reese insisted she and the children remain at the cabin until she was fully recovered, an arrangement Ruby reluctantly accepted after realizing she had few alternatives. Her cousin in Helena, she admitted, was more an acquaintance than family, and she had no guarantee of welcome. As days stretched into weeks, a routine developed. Reese would rise early to tend his small herd of cattle and horses, often with Samuel as his eager shadow. Ruby took over the cooking and household tasks, while Emma divided her time between helping her mother and following Reese and Samuel on their adventures. One evening, after the children had been put to bed, Ruby and Reese sat on the cabin's small porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "I need to make plans," Ruby said quietly. "We've imposed on your hospitality far too long." Reese turned to look at her, noting how the moonlight silvered her auburn hair. In the weeks since her recovery, he'd come to admire not just her beauty but her strength and determination. "You're not imposing," he said. "Truth is, this place hasn't felt so much like a home since." He trailed off, unsure how to continue. "Since your wife," Ruby prompted gently. Reese shook his head. "Never married. I meant since I was a boy before the war. My parents had a place in Missouri, not unlike this, though bigger. Lost it during the fighting." Ruby's hand found his in the darkness. "I'm sorry, the children and I know something about loss too." "Your husband, was it recent?" "2 years ago," Ruby answered. "John was a good man, but mining is dangerous work. A tunnel collapsed." She paused, gathering herself. "We did all right for a while. I took in washing and sewing, but then there was an outbreak of typhoid fever in the mining camp. Business dried up, and what savings we had went to the doctor who couldn't save John." Reese squeezed her hand. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The children are thriving," and he hesitated, then plunged ahead. "And I've grown mighty fond of having you all around." In the days that followed, something shifted between Reese and Ruby. Their conversations lingered longer, their glances held more meaning, and more than once Mrs. Hawkins caught them standing closer than strictly necessary while working together. "You're sweet on that widow woman," Mrs. Hawkins observed one afternoon when she and Reese were alone in the barn. Reese concentrated on brushing Thunder's coat. "She's a fine woman." "That she is," Mrs. Hawkins agreed. "And those children adore you. Samuel told me yesterday he wishes you were his pa." Reese's hand stilled. "He said that, indeed he did. And if my old eyes don't deceive me, his mama might not object to the idea either." That evening, Reese found himself watching Ruby as she sat by the fire, mending one of Samuel's shirts. The lamplight caught the copper highlights in her hair, and her expression of concentration as she worked the needle through the fabric made something warm unfurl in his chest. "Ruby," he said quietly, mindful of the sleeping children, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." She looked up, needle poised mid-stitch. "Yes," Reese moved to sit beside her. "I know you've been making plans to move on, but I've been hoping, really, that you might consider staying permanently." Ruby's eyes widened. "Reese, not as my housekeeper," he hurried to clarify. "As my wife, if you'd have me." Ruby set down her sewing. "This is sudden." "Is it?" Reese asked. "Feels to me like I've known you a lifetime already. I know how you take your coffee, how your eyes crinkle when you laugh, how fiercely you love those children, and they deserve a stable home, a chance to put down roots." "And you?" Ruby asked softly. "What do you deserve, Reese Adams?" "A chance to love you properly," he answered without hesitation. "To be a father to Emma and Samuel, to build something lasting together." Ruby was quiet for so long that Reese began to fear he'd misread everything. Then she reached for his hand. "When John died, I thought that part of my life was over. I couldn't imagine loving anyone else." She met his gaze steadily. "But these past weeks, watching you with my children, seeing your kindness and your strength. I've begun to imagine a different future. Is that a yes?" Reese asked, his heart hammering in his chest. "It's a maybe," Ruby answered, but her smile was warm. "Let's give it time, a proper courtship. The children have faced enough upheaval." Reese brought her hand to his lips. "I can be a patient man, Ruby Turner." True to his word, Reese courted Ruby with respectful determination over the following months. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his rides checking fence lines. He carved a delicate wooden box for her sewing notions. And each Sunday, he drove the family to the small church in the nearest town, 15 miles away, where they gradually became known as the Adams family. An assumption neither Reese nor Ruby bothered to correct. As autumn approached, bringing with it brilliant gold aspens and cooler nights, Reese found himself increasingly certain that Ruby returned his feelings. She leaned into his touch when he helped her down from the wagon. Her gaze lingered on him across the dinner table. And once, when they found themselves alone while collecting berries, she had reached up to brush an errant leaf from his hair, her fingers lingering against his cheek. On a crisp October evening, Reese suggested a ride to show Ruby his favorite spot on his property, a small meadow overlooking a stream where wild roses bloomed in summer. Though the roses were long gone, the view of mountains painted purple by the setting sun was spectacular. "It's beautiful," Ruby breathed as they dismounted. "No wonder you love this land." "I've worked hard to make something of it," Reese said, spreading a blanket on the ground. 20 acres paid for, another 30 I'm still working to buy from the railroad company. Enough grass for 50 head of cattle, and I've got 30 now. Ruby sat beside him on the blanket. "You've built something substantial, Reese. You should be proud." "I am," he agreed, "but lately I've been thinking it's not enough to build something just for myself." He turned to face her. "Ruby, these past months with you and the children have been the happiest of my life. I meant what I said that first day when I found you all by the road. Those children became mine in my heart from that moment, and so did you." Ruby's eyes glistened in the fading light. "Reese, I'm asking again, Ruby Turner. Will you marry me? Let me be a father to Emma and Samuel, a husband to you. Let me love you for the rest of our days." Instead of answering, Ruby leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was their first kiss, gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Reese pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ruby's smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Reese Adams will marry you." Their wedding took place in November, a simple ceremony in the town's white-steepled church. Mrs. Hawkins stood as Ruby's witness, beaming with satisfaction at the match she felt partially responsible for arranging. Emma served as flower girl, scattering late-blooming asters along the aisle, while Samuel proudly carried the rings on a small cushion. Mrs. Hawkins had sewn for the occasion. As winter settled over the Montana territory, the newly official Adams family established holiday traditions in their snug cabin. Reese taught the children to string popcorn garlands for Christmas. Ruby baked her mother's recipe for gingerbread. And on Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, Reese presented Ruby with a deed to the cabin and land, now officially listing her as co-owner. "This is our legacy for the children," he told her as they lay in bed that night, her head resting on his chest. "Something that can't be taken away no matter what comes." Ruby traced patterns on his skin. "You've given us so much more than land and a house, Reese. You've given us a future." Spring brought new beginnings. The garden Ruby planted flourished, the cattle herd welcomed new calves, and the children thrived in their stable home. Emma revealed a talent for storytelling, often entertaining them with elaborate tales of princesses and cowboys. Samuel, still Reese's shadow, showed an aptitude for working with the horses that made Reese proudly declare he'd be the finest horseman in the territory one day. And then, as wildflowers once again bloomed across the meadows, Ruby shared news that completed their happiness. A baby. Reese repeated, his voice filled with wonder when she told him one evening. "We're having a baby," Ruby nodded, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "In winter. Around Christmas, the doctor thinks." Reese gathered her in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around until she laughed. "Put me down, you fool, you'll make me dizzy." He set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Are you happy, Ruby? Truly happy?" She looked up at the man who had rescued her family from desperation, who had opened his heart and home to them, who had become the center of her world. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching Emma and Samuel chase fireflies in the twilight, Reese reflected on how completely his life had changed in just 1 year. From a solitary existence focused solely on survival and building his ranch, he had found himself at the center of a loving family, with another child on the way. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Ruby asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "About fate," Reese answered. "If I hadn't decided to check my south fence line that day, if I'd taken the other trail home, if I'd been even an hour later." He shook his head. "So many chances for us never to have met." Ruby took his hand. "But we did meet. You found us when we needed you most." "And you saved me right back," Reese said softly. "I didn't know how lonely I was until suddenly I wasn't anymore." As summer progressed, Ruby's pregnancy became visible, causing much excitement among the children. Emma appointed herself special helper to her mother, while Samuel solemnly informed everyone they encountered that he was going to be a big brother again. In July, they hosted a small gathering to celebrate Emma's 8th birthday. Mrs. Hawkins came, as did the pastor and his wife, and several neighboring ranchers with their families. As Reese watched Ruby orchestrating games for the children, her pregnancy now a visible curve beneath her summer dress, he felt a contentment he'd never thought possible. "You've done well for yourself, Adams," commented Frank Peterson, a cattle rancher from 10 miles west. "Fine woman, good children, prospering land." "Luckiest day of my life was finding them by the roadside," Reese agreed, his eyes never leaving Ruby. Peterson chuckled. "Way I heard it, you told those youngsters they were yours from the first moment." Reese smiled at the memory. "Felt that way from the start, like they were always meant to be mine and I just hadn't met them yet." As autumn painted the countryside in rich hues of gold and crimson, Ruby's pregnancy advanced. Reese found himself increasingly protective, insisting on handling the heavier chores she normally shared. Ruby tolerated his hovering with good-natured patience, though she drew the line when he suggested she might be too delicate to continue teaching Emma her letters. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she informed him tartly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, usually while continuing to work their fields and tend their homes." Reese held up his hands in surrender. "Yes, madam, I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." Ruby's expression softened. "I know, and I love you for it." She took his hand and placed it on her rounded belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Feel that? Strong just like his papa." "Or stubborn like his mama," Reese countered with a grin, earning himself a playful swat. As winter approached, bringing with it the promise of their child's birth, Reese found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The desperate young widow and her hungry children he'd found by the roadside had become his entire world. The cabin that had once felt too quiet now rang with laughter and occasional squabbles, with the clatter of dishes and the stomping of small boots. On a snowy December night, As a blizzard howled outside, Ruby went into labor. Mrs. Hawkins, who had moved in temporarily to help during Ruby's confinement, took charge of the children while Reese stayed by Ruby's side, supporting her through each contraction. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "So strong, my Ruby." After hours of labor, as dawn broke pale and clear over fresh snow, their daughter entered the world with a robust cry that immediately announced her presence. Reese cut the cord with shaking hands, then watched in awe as Mrs. Hawkins cleaned the tiny, red-faced infant and placed her in Ruby's arms. "She's perfect," Ruby whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as she counted fingers and toes. "Perfect in every way." Reese perched carefully on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't begin to name. "She's beautiful," he managed, his voice rough, "just like her mother." When Emma and Samuel were finally allowed in to meet their new sister, their reactions cemented the family bonds Reese cherished. Emma approached with reverent caution, her eyes wide with wonder as she gently touched the baby's tiny hand. Samuel, after initial skepticism about the red, wrinkled appearance of the newcomer, declared that she looked just like Pa, and that he would teach her to ride horses when she was bigger. They named her Hope, a testament to the journey that had brought them together and the future they were building. As spring once again transformed the landscape, bringing fresh green to the pastures and new calves to the growing herd, Reese stood on the porch of the cabin, now expanded with a new room for the older children, and watched his family. Ruby sat under the cottonwood tree nursing baby Hope. Emma was reading aloud from a book Reese had purchased on his last trip to town, while Samuel carefully constructed what appeared to be a miniature corral from sticks. Ruby looked up and caught his eye, smiling with such love that Reese felt his heart might burst from happiness. 2 years ago, he had been a solitary man focused only on surviving from one season to the next. Now he was surrounded by love, with responsibilities that gave his life purpose and joy that filled each day. He thought again of that fateful moment on the dusty road, of the desperate woman and hungry children who had changed his life forever, of the impulsive declaration he'd made, lifting those children in his arms and declaring them his own. They truly were his now, all of them. His to love, his to protect, his to cherish for all the days of his life. And as he descended the steps to join his family in the dappled shade of the cottonwood, Reese Adams knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true home.